Okay. All right. Boker Tov. We start a new Masechet today. Sotah. So our daf is Bays. And one or two quick words about the Masechet. Thank God we now have back to a real Rashi, which means that just have the wonderful benefit of Rashi's, like you really get to appreciate Rashi when you don't have him for a while. Sort of, it's very distilled, commentary to the Gemara. Those four is for there to be a more real Tosfos, because when Tosfos had to do the work of Rashi, which is basically what Tosfos had to do in Nazir, there was not as much of an opportunity for Tosfos to do much more than clarify what was going on the daf itself, rather than ask more for sort of like broad questions in terms of comparing to other sugyot, or just more sort of like broadly analytic types of questions. So that's very nice. And there's another Tosfos here along the side. But what it also does mean is that there's more Gemara per daf, because when you have Tosfos that are so long, when you have the pseudo Rashi is doing his own job of commentating and not doing as terse as Rashi, and then you have the pseudo Tos, and then you have Tosfos, which is taking on Rashi's responsibility, but also longer way. So much of the Rashi, of the pseudo Rashi and the Tosfos are filling up the daf in terms of just explaining what's going on. Whereas here, because Rashi sort of gives you the base explanation, and therefore Tosfos can focus questions, there's less of Rashi. There's less, there's less in terms of the commentary of the base commentary, because Rashi does such a good job being terse and to the point, and there's less Tosfos because Tosfos is now really focused on a much more narrowly defined task. So the dapim look more like standard dapim of the Gemara. There's a lot more Gemara per daf, and there's also a lot of Agadata. And so if you just glance ahead, here, like on daf Yadav, whatever, you can just see, because like daf like this, right, on daf Teramabet, right, there's a lot. So that's two reasons why there's a lot more Gemara per daf, so I'll have to talk faster. So that's just in terms of in terms of like the structure of the Gemara. In terms of what the Gemara covers, as advertised, it deals with the parsha of Sotah in the Torah, and we'll deal right away with sort of placement in Seder Nashim. And the first 6 prakim are just procedure of under what circumstances is a woman declared a sotah, a woman suspected of having committed adultery, that would necessitate going through the process of having her being brought to the Beit Hamikdash, etc. And once it decides what are the circumstances of a woman's sotah, they get down to the of the bringing of the drinking of the water, and how would that ritual go, and then the bringing of the sacrifices, and how would that ritual go, what could be the various rituals, what about special cases, let's say a woman is a shomer and who's suspected of committing adultery. Would it be the same halacha as a wife? Let's say she's in a rusa, not an isu'ah. So it then also deals with special cases, but very sort of logical structure and almost almost in the last tefillah, or whether kohanim, or a whole wide range, can they be must they be said? So that becomes an interesting opportunity. It's different mitzvot, and you can use other language to explore some of them as well. In particular, the last parak is about Egla Arufa, the breaking of the murder. You don't know who did it. And it starts with a question about whether that is that as an opportunity to discuss exactly of Egla Arufa. When do you do it? How do you measure the most nearby city of its different parameters? Because there's no other place. Sounds like a secondary discussion. Well, it could have been So this is the opportunity in Shas, the one place in Shas where it discusses the parameters of Egla Arufa. And I think that it's not just coincidental, like to discuss it, and we have the hook of Kol Hashon. I also think it's because Egla Arufa, like, like Sotah, I mean, is a case where what is a ritual that you do when you don't know if a serious type of a offense has been committed. Right, so both of them are, in a sense, rituals that are done in this case of doubt. So I think that's another layer. So that's going to be an interesting, end to the Masechet. Yes,
you definitely have a dead body in one case, and you have a suspicion in the other.
Right. That is correct. Well, that's a good point. In one case, you know what happened, you don't know who did it. In the other case, the basic question is, you know who the suspected parties are. You don't know if something happened.
But maybe you don't know if the person was murdered. He may have just died.
That's true. I mean, right. That's true. But the way the Torah does describe it, it does sound like it's clear that a murder did occur. But right. Okay. All right. So, all right. I don't know what the heck is happening here, whether this is working or not. So let's keep on going. So so let's start now with the Mishnah. Okay. Hamikaneh li'ishto. If a man is now, Mikaneh here becomes an interesting verb, which the Gemara is going to get to, because the way the Torah describes it is ish kitziste ishto. So a man's wife has gone wayward, and then we're back, and then it sort of becomes clear that he's suspecting this, and it says v'kineat ishto v'hinitma'a ki what ish kitziste ishto malabo mal v'avar alav ruach kin'a, a spirit of jealousy passes by him, v'kineat ishto v'hinitma'a avar alav ruach kin'a v'kineat. So he's jealous. Is he right or is he wrong? We don't know, but he's jealous. Okay, and then the Torah goes on to say that what does he do? He brings his wife for this ritual of the Sotah. So actually, and it's really important to mention this at the outset, that it's got one really interesting thing to note in terms of the how the Tosha Baal Peh frames Sotah, is that what it does is it takes how it sort of diverges from the simple pshat of the psukim, because I would say there are two places most obvious that comes to mind where the Torah sort of allows for less of a judicial system and more, one case is like the vigilante justice of the Goel Hadam, right? So there, right, somebody, where somebody, the redeemer of blood, a relative was murdered, you go and you murder, it's whatever, in response. And there it's clear that the Torah is sort of tempering the reality of Goel Hadam. It doesn't sort of eliminate it, but it brings in the judicial structure. It has the person being sent to the Arei Miklat, V'shalchu Misham, and then the Beis Din, right, takes over, and they basically bring the guy back from the Ir Miklat, and they do a normal judicial type of a proceedings, right? And if he gets killed in a way that violates this procedure by the Goel Adam, then the Goel Adam has committed murder. So nevertheless, if in certain cases, if the guy is outside of the Ir Miklat when he shouldn't be, right? So then the Goel Adam can kill him without, with impunity. And according to some Tanaim, he even has a mitzvah to kill him. So it's an interesting, balance, moving away from this vigilante tribal type of justice to a judicial system. But nevertheless, it hasn't been completely eliminated. So what you have, that's in the psukim themselves. So what you have by Sotah, right, is you have something that in the simple sense of the psukim, there's absolutely no evidence. He's jealous. Who knows what he did? So he goes in, he schleps her to the Beis HaMikdash, and we're going to now have this ritual. So it's completely, he has that power or ability just because he's jealous. Doesn't need any evidence. Completely subjective. What Chazal do, how they interpret it though, is kinei becomes, the whole thing becomes judicial, there's got to be a verb, judicialized, I don't know. Anyway, the whole thing becomes sort of brought into a judicial system. No, but I mean more than that. Just the whole system is brought into a judicial context. And the kinei et ishto becomes almost, a concrete act of laying groundwork to create sufficient circumstantial evidence to a legal act that's going to give us the basis now for saying that there's reason to think that good circumstantial evidence that she might have committed adultery, and therefore we can process this and continue to take this further. So it does a sort of amazing thing, not just in terms of like sort of making those demands that the circumstantial evidence that foundation be laid, but taking this verb, v'kineat ishto, which is purely about his own subjective jealousy, and turning it into almost like a judicial act, okay, or a very concrete act that creates objective circumstantial evidence. So that's sort of so let's take a look about how that plays out. But that's the word mekaneh ishto is going to be an act of warning one's wife not to be in private with another man, and as we'll see in the Mishnah, and warning her in the presence of witnesses. So it's actually a formal act that creates, this context, okay? A specific man. Don't be in private with this specific man, and she's being warned in the presence of witnesses, and this is called being mikanel ishto. Okay, so, and by the way, notice also the difference of the preposition. In the Torah, it is v'kinei et ishto, right, and it's mikanel li'ishto, because here it shifts from being jealous about his wife to warning his wife, admonishing his wife. Okay, yes.
Yeah, the way it sounds in the Torah, though, it sounds like she's guilty. You're just, it's just a technicality that we can't.
Well, that's the other thing in the Torah. The Torah.
No. Just listen. This is how it's introduced. I just said ish. You skip the second pasuk. Ish ki tishteh ishto umala b'mal. Then v'shachav ish otah shivat zera nam b'nei isha v'nistar v'hidi tima v'ein b'lav hino pasha. That's how it's like.
Right.
Introduced.
Right.
Someone slept with her, but her husband didn't know.
Right.
And she was like, closeted, but there's no,
right.
There's no witness.
Right.
Then it says, he's gonna maybe, and she was, maybe she wasn't. You know what I mean? But the way it's,
I think what Michael's saying is absolutely correct. I think the pshat of the psukim is there's a presumption of guilt. Mm-hmm. So it's not only that he's entitled due to his jealousy, and there's no evidence mentioned in the psukim, and not even circumstantial. There's an automatic presumption of guilt, and in a way, she needs the ritual to, remove her from that presumption of guilt. But why was there that presumption?
You're ignoring the second possibility.
But the next
Right. Look, it is true. Okay, we can debate this. I agree with Michael that it is sort of saying like, okay, we assume she's guilty. Maybe she didn't do it, but the basic meaning it's not. Because I think he's right. It says here's what happened, or maybe she didn't do it. But anyway, the interesting thing to read is according to halacha, and which is not clear in the psukim, once a woman is a sotah, she has a status of time'ah, and she is forbidden to continue to sleep or to have sex with her husband. Her husband's forbidden to continue to have sex with her. She actually has a status of as if she had committed adultery until that status is clarified through the ritual in the Beit HaMikdash. So again, that also reflects almost like this presumption of guilt until it's clarified. The way the Gemara is going to understand it is because we've laid this groundwork of circumstantial evidence. At least debate that, but I agree with that.
Another level, you might consider this as if in his imagination.
Right, that's a good point. Meaning V'shachav Ishotah is like, here is what he is imagining. Right, that's a good point. That might be describing like, these are the images that are like, that are right. This is what he is. Right, exactly. This is what's filling his head.
The psukim to me always suggested that this entire ritual was for the benefit of the man's assuaging clarifying or assuaging his jealousy.
Right.
Whereas what you're describing is it's a ritual that's necessitated by the real possibility that she's an adult.
Look, I think we can discuss that. I mean, I do think on the one hand, the psukim do not make clear what the halacha later says, which is that she has a status of being tme'ah until the ritual. So if he doesn't have that status, you could say that it's just the man's jealousy and we're just dealing with his jealousy. On the other hand, I do want to sort of say, to back up, Michael's read of the psukim, is that when the Kohen makes her swear, the Kohen says, like he basically presents it as if this happened when he makes her take that oath as well. So I do think that there's a sense that we really do suspect, or maybe even we assume that. So anyway, but the Gemara here, the halacha, reframes this as laying circumstantial circumstantial evidence and as a formal act of mikanel li'ishto, warning the wife. Okay, so let's take a look. By the way, I should say that that Nazir ended with a whole series of Mishnayot about raglayim ledavar, and when you have circumstantial evidence and basis to assume, and that's generally, although that word is not used in this Mishnah, seems to be the point about Sotah is raglayim ledavar, and that phrase does come up soon enough. So that might have been an intentional way of segueing from Nazir to Sotah, is raglayim ledavar. So let's take a look. See, we haven't gotten past the first two words. Hamakanel ishto, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Mekanela al pi shnayim, he warns her in the presence of two witnesses, umashke, and can make her drink al pi eid echad, by one witness, because it's not enough to warn. What Chazal also read in is, okay, he warned her, but then what happened afterwards? Where's the circumstantial evidence? So then there's another event that occurred, which is vinistera, okay, vihinitma. Okay, and now that it is in the psukim, right? Because the psukim do say, "Okay, what is it? V'nistra v'nitma." Okay, avar levuchina v'kines ishto. No, it only says, it doesn't say v'nistra v'hilo nitma, right? It just says v'nistra v'hinitma, right? V'nistra v'hinit. So in the psukim, it's not clear that she objectively was nistra, and the question is what happened. You could read the psukim like he suspects that she was nistara v'nitma'a, but maybe there's no evidence that anything happened. So the other thing that Chazal do is they not only make kinyat ishta, warning her in a formal judicial and a formal act, but then nistara is objectively known. And because nistara is objectively known that she was in private with this man, with the backdrop that she was specifically warned against going into private with this man, that then becomes the basis for this concern. Okay.
Another way of saying then is that if there was no aid at all about this stira, one way or the other, then she can't.
Well, let's take a look.
Right?
Okay, but let's take a look. It might depend on which position of the Tanaim you adopt. Right. There's no direct evidence, right? But the point what Chazal do is they say v'nistara, that is known as right in the pasuk. V'nistara could still just be his imagination. Right? But what Chazal do is not only they say kinei means to warn in front of witnesses, but they say nistara then becomes also an established fact. Okay, there are those two stages, being warned and then stira, and then being in private. Okay, so let's one more time. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Mekanel al pi shnayim, warned in front of two, umashka pi eid echad o pi atzmo. But here, to make her drink, to say that she's violated this warning and gone in private, that suffices if there's even one witness or even his own testimony. Okay, so here actually it's not so objective. He still has to say that he actually directly observed it. He can't just say he suspects her. But nevertheless, even he himself, according to Rabbi Eliezer, is believed to say that she went into private.
But that would never work in regular, right? I can't be the one.
Right, obviously not. Okay, but here it is. But okay, so that definitely does make it more him. But he's not just suspecting; he's making at least a claim. Rabbi Yoshua Omer, Mekanel al pi shnayim umashka al pi shnayim. Rabbi Yoshua makes it as most objective as possible. The warning has to be in front of two, and her going into private to then be able to force her to drink also has to be in front of two.
And he can't be one of them.
Correct. Kate said Mekanela. How does he warn her? Omer la bifnei shnayim. That's not debated. Both Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua say the warning is in front of two. He says in front of two. Al tidabri nish ploni. Do not speak with so and so. Okay. Now, that seems presumably, there's always an interesting question here about what phrase is a euphemism. Okay. And tidabri sometimes is a euphemism for sex, but presumably he's saying, no, I don't even want you speaking to this guy. Okay. The dibra imo, now she violates that and she goes ahead and she speaks to the guy. Adayin hi muteres lebeita, she's permissible to her house, meaning to have sex with her husband. Umuteres lechol b'truma, she's the wife of a kohen, she can eat truma, because again, if she had committed adultery, or if she has a status of a sotah, that will treat her as if she committed adultery until it's clarified, she can't have sex with her husband, and if the wife of a kohen can't eat truma. So
the bear here is not.
It's not sex, right? Exactly. So just because she violated, that would not make her a sotah. So what makes her a sotah is not just the violating, but the going into private, v'nistara. Nichnesa imo lebeit haseter, if she went with him into a private location, v'shasa imo kidei tum'ah, and stayed there the length of time that it would take to have sex, kidei tum'ah. Okay, that's based on the pasuk of v'nit me'ah, she became defiled, which means that she had sex. Okay, then asur lebeitav asur lechol b'tumah. Then she has the status of a sotah until it's cleared up what happened through this ritual in the Beis Hamikdash. She can't have sex with her husband. She can't eat truma. The mate, and let's say the husband dies before the whole ritual is done. So now there's no way to do the ritual because the husband's dead. You need a husband alive to do the ritual. Okay, so is she the status of a woman who committed adultery or not? So she's a suffix. And choletzet v'lo mitya bemet. So if there's a living brother and there was no children from this marriage, you can do chalitza, you can't do yibum, because yibum would not be permitted in the case where the woman had committed adultery. Okay, and we'll find out about that. So let's bracket the Yeah, I do think, I didn't go back and check, I do think Sotah came up once or twice in Masechet Yevamot. It was a while ago, but here it's looking at it right from the other end. Yeah.
So based on this, I mean, unless I'm having too close to read, if he said more than one person, then it wouldn't be valid. He said, don't go
speak to
two people,
Plony or Plony, and then right. So that's like, can you combine two separate? Is that considered as two separate keynote combined at once? Right. You know, if you said don't speak,
or you can't be. I don't want to speak to anyone ever. I mean, you can't do that. Right?
Well, okay. So those are good questions. We'll take a look at them tomorrow. Exactly. Now it is interesting, though. You know, he doesn't have to say don't go in private. His jealousy could go even beyond that. I don't want to see you speaking to that. Clearly, that's a jealousy that's even beyond, right? You know, and it could also be a jealousy that he doesn't yet suspect her of doing anything wrong. He's just as concerned about where things might lead. Like, I saw you flirting with that guy. I saw you talking to that guy, right? I don't want to, right? So, but that would be sufficient to constitute a warning, right? Even if he's not yet suspecting her of having done it, or even if he's not telling her not to be in private, even if it exceeds those types of concerns. Okay, let's take a look at the Gemara. Okay, and by the way, another interesting thing to note in addition to how Chazal have made this more under judicial auspices is, you know, the Torah is not critical of what the husband does. You know, besides the earlier question of is it presuming she's guilty or not, but the Torah certainly does not say anything wrong about the man's actions. The end of the psukim is v'nikaha ish me'avon v'isha itisat avona. So why do you even have to say v'nikaha ish me'avon? Seems to be saying like he did nothing wrong about suspecting her, right? Seems to be a pshat way of reading this. So we will see. You know, as we saw in the Darim, it's so interesting, the Darim, Nazir, and Sotah, right? You know, that are these good phenomena or bad phenomena, you know? So we saw always this ambivalence around making the Darim and ambivalence around being a Nazir. So we'll also see a similar questioning and ambivalence and maybe even negativity towards the husband's acting in this type of a way, which is not evident in the Psukim. Okay, so let's take a look at the Gemara. Michti.
I'm sorry, in other words, it seems to be counterpoint from antiquity around honor killings. In other words, there's no justice there. That's exactly
right. So in a way, that's a good point. Similar to controlling the Goel Hadam, already in the Psukim, while it hasn't been made judicial, it is controlling the complete vigilante honor killings. That is correct. And that is a point that really needs to be underscored. Right. At least it's saying you might have your jealousy, you can't act on it. Like, here's the way you got to deal with it. Right, that's a very good point. Right, so already the psukim it's controlling, you know, complete vigilante. Right, exactly, and then the Torah Shabbat Peh makes it even more. It can't be all the husband's jealousy. There has to be something a little more objective.
Not just at that time.
Right.
At this time now.
Right. Right. Exactly. Yep. All right. So let's take a look. Michti. Tana, everybody has more to say somehow about Sotah than about Nazir. I can't understand it. Okay. Tana, okay, Michti, let's take a look. Tana mi Nazir Sali. The Tana just finished Masechet Nazir. My Tana de Katana Sotah. Why does Sotah follow Nazir? Could because it's the only Masechet left, but okay. But all right. To the Rabbi, the Tanya, Rabbi Omer. Lama nismecha parshat Nazir lepashat Sotah. Why in the Torah does Nazir and Sotah juxtaposed. Okay, there in the Torah, of course, Sotah precedes Nazir. Lomar lecha, to tell you, shekol roa Sotah b'kil kula. If somebody sees a Sotah in her disgrace, and he sees like what what can happen if people sort of follow their desires, and yazir atzmo min hayayin, it should lead to him forswearing himself from wine, because wine then brings about, it leads to indulgence and going ahead and can put you on a bad path, and acting in ways that you otherwise would not act.
It's a good thing to be a Nazir.
What?
This sounds like it's a good thing to be a Nazir.
Right. Anyway, okay, but that has that order. Notice, by the way, also it's about the man. Like it's still haroeh yazir atzmo. So he sees it's so funny that even when it's about the woman sinning and taking heed, it's about men taking heed from the woman's sin as opposed to women taking. Like it's all, even here it's like still from the man's perspective.
Actually, women can be in a zira anyway.
Right, exactly.
Did you finish Kedushin and Gittin when I was away last weekend?
Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. It's not the last one. It's the last. You're right. I don't know why I said it was the last. You're right. It's the last in this crop. You're right. I'm too eager to move on to Nazikin. You're right. Okay. Good point. All right. Anyway. Okay. So Lisni Sotah v'hardo Lisni Nazir. So say Sotah and then say Nazir, which is the order in the Psukim. So Tana Nidar. Now we're going to get a look at the whole sequence. Ksuvas talked about, one of the things about Ksuvas was the relationship of husband and wife a wife making vows and the husband annulling it. So that became a nice segue into Nidarim, although that wasn't at the very end of Ktuvot, but it certainly is. Nidarim relate to the husband-wife marriage relationship. A lot of Nidarim is in the Torah, is the parsha about husband and wife and annulling vows. Okay, so that was a logical follow-up from Ktuvot. The idea to Tani Nidarim, Tana Nazir, Nidarim. What's we're talking about Nidarim? We're talking about Nazir, which is a type of a neder. The Tani Sotah get a Rabbi, and once we have that, now we have Sotah that follows Nazir, just as it does sort of in the in the Torah. It's juxtaposed, the order is reversed because of the logical sort of move of to vote Nidarim Nazir as a unit, and then moving on to Sotah. Now, of course, also the reason is, as I always say when we begin a Masechet, that it's the number of prakim, right? It's the size of the Masechet that determines, like the bigger Masechtot defined by number of prakim come earlier. But that being said, how many prakim are there in Sotah?
10.
9, I think.
Clearly.
9. And how many were there in Nazir? There were 9. Okay, so you see, you still need to answer the question because they're both 9. So you could have had Sotah come first. And it really is true that this sort of is a logical sequence, Ksuvos, Nidarim, Nazir, as a unit, and then moving on to Sotah. Okay, so now let's go on. Hamekanez, a man who is jealous of his wife or warns his wife. This sounds like only if he's doing it, but not that he should do it. Okay, Rashi says it could have said, it's a different way. It could have said, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Mikane Adam Lishto al Pishnayim. It starts with Hamikane, he's already doing it. Let's talk about how it gets done. But it sounds like it's b'diavad. Tosfos points out that very often it says ha-X and it doesn't mean b'diavad. Okay, ha-holech lishchot et ha-Pesach. Okay, that doesn't mean it's b'diavad. So again, the fact that the Gemara is choosing to read this as a b'diavad, right? Maybe again, because it could have framed it differently, but maybe because the Gemara is already inclined to be disapproving of this, as we will see. Yes?
You have a mitzvah of doing that. That's somewhere else.
Right.
So it's not.
Right, but there are some that are going to say it's a mitzvah l'kanot et ishto, But yes, that's basically what Tosfos says. He says, look, when it's possible to read it as a lechatchila or whatever, when it's clear, we'll read it that way. But here, I mean,
that it's the elsewhere where it tells you to do that thing that makes it.
Right, makes it clear.
The Hatila thing, and then since we don't have that anymore here,
right. So that's essentially what Tosfos says. But it could also be that the Gemara is inclined to try to read this in a disapproving way. So let's take a look. Right, but it could be that there's obviously there is a real grammatical thing the Gemara is picking up. Right, exactly. Right. So right at the outset, with very little textual basis, the Gemara puts out there the first thing you hear in this Masechet is Asur Lakanos. I think that's pretty powerful. Those are the first thing you hear, Asur Lakanos. So you're not allowed to do this procedure. Okay. Amar Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak, ki have patach Reish Lakish besota. When Reish Lakish would begin learning, now is it Masechet Sotah, or Rashi says he would talk about Sotah, the Parshat Sotah. He was giving a drasha and show. Amar Hachi, here's what he would say. And often when they would give like a drasha, they would start with Agadata and so on. So, Ein mezavgin lo adam isha elfi ma'asav. Again, interestingly, using the wine metaphor in the juxtaposition to Nazir. So to limzo kos is to pour a glass of wine, to mix it with water. Anyway, heaven does not sort of make, sort of match up with a person, pour for a man, a woman, except...
Zivug, mizavgin, right?
Oh, zivug, Oh, I'm thinking of Mozgin. Yeah, I don't know what's with me today. Okay, what?
But it could be a play on words.
Yeah, but I think you're right. It would have been Mozgin. I think you're right. Zivug, right? Okay, all right.
This is not just a glass of wine.
Right. Okay. Anyway, I don't know what's with me this morning. All right. Okay. A person is only with a man, with a woman, according to his actions, according to his deeds. Because the staff, the lot of the wicked will not fall in the in the lot of the righteous. So if you're a righteous person, then you're not going to get something that's deserving for wicked people. Which means what?
Which means that your wife wouldn't have gone to do all this unless you were bad to begin with.
Which means that if you're about to publicly be jealous about your wife, what are you communicating and broadcasting to the rest of the world? That you must have deserved a wife like this, right? So it's like, on the one hand, it's like, if this is happening to you, what did you do wrong to deserve it? But I think it also very much, rather than dumping all on the woman, right? If you look, it's like, again, going like, if you think of that in conversation to the psukim about the kineas, v'nikaha ish me'avon. Right, and this is sort of saying, no, if he's going ahead and if this is what his wife is doing, you got to wonder what he did and what type of a person he is. So it's almost like exactly not Vinikav. What does it reflect about him? And then one also wonders what the message is about. Asur l'kanot. Like if you better think twice because you're going to be saying something about who you are as well, not just about who she is. Yes.
Isn't it possible that a person couldn't, husband couldn't do that if he didn't have some level of
yes,
purity?
Right. So that the waters wouldn't work if he himself had sinned. Okay, right. So that's if, in fact, he had. This is more like of a theological statement. But if this is a people's belief, right, then that will impact, So that's what I think. I think that this is a way of making men really think twice before they go ahead and do this. Amar Rabbi bar Bar Chanan Rabbi Yochanan, v'kashim l'zavgam kikriya. Here, clear it's zivug. V'kashim l'zavgam kikriyat yamsuf. It is difficult to match them correctly as the splitting of the sea. Okay, because how do you get a perfect match? Shne'emar, right? Very appropriate now with the whole shidduch crisis. Kasha lizav gam kriyat yamsuf. Shne'emar Elohim Moshiv yichidi baita. God makes the individuals dwell at the home. So actually means it takes two individuals and makes them set up a home, matches them, and creates a bayit. Okay, motzi asirim b'kosharot. From removing those that are bound with so what does b'kosharot mean? Does it mean from their chains? Rashi says it means that's what I think pshat is. Rashi says it means at the right time, like he brought he brought them out in the spring. It was a nice time, but anyway, yeah, exactly. So anyway, but what? Yeah. This is real Rashi, yeah. So that's what I was saying initially, that's why Tosos is normal, because Rashi is back.
And so anyway, was Kriyat Yamsuf.
But so you see, so God took them out, so talking about like Kriyat Yamsuf, Yitzias Mitzrayim, and that is being compared to, finding two individuals and creating a match. Aini, is this really true? Rav Yudah Marav, Arba'im Yom Kodem Yitzias Avlad, Bas Kol Yotzes, Omes Bas Ploni Leploni, Bais Ploni Leploni, Sada Ploni Leploni, that 40 days before the child is formed. What's the significance of 40 days before the child is formed? What happens 40 days before the child is formed?
That's when conception.
It's when it's conceived, right? It's the sense is that 40 days after conception is when it becomes like considered a fetus. I mean, that's not just Maya Ba'alma in one phrase of the Gemara. That's the beginning of the forming of the child is 40 days after conception. So this means at the moment of conception. Okay, so at the moment of conception, okay, a heavenly voice comes out and says, the daughter of so and so will go to Ploni, and and he'll get such and such and such feel. So why is this a question? Because if the match is lefi masav, then you can't do the match yet because you don't know yet what his masim will be because there's bechira chavshis and al kol b'dei shemayim chutz miyir shemayim. So this
doesn't mean that God doesn't know.
Well, okay, that gets to that whole question, but we have to anyway. But that would obviously raise that question. So this midrash, in a way, it speaks about like as a bas kol and might speak about mazel, but this midrash can easily be translated into, the reality about how so much of our life is predetermined for us before we're born. I mean, it certainly was that way in the ancient world when there was like very little choice and very little mobility and so on. But even nowadays, right, your genetics, so it has a lot to do with your character and your intelligence, whatever. Are you being born into what type of a family, right? Upper middle class, poor, what type of education are you going to receive? What type of society are you going to live in? So much is predetermined already, before you even come out into this world. And that seems to be what this midrash is saying. Like at the moment of conception, right? It's always like, are you going to be what type of field are you going to get? What type of house are you going to get? But interestingly, it also says, what type of woman are you going to marry? Now, how is that fated? Okay. And this is the idea of, now, by the way, I should say another midrash says, is this child going to be a Chacham or Rasha, Ashir or Ani? And then it says, so the Gemara, and all these other things. So the Gemara says, 1 minute, I get everything else. Ashir or Ani, this or that. I'm not Chacham or Tipech, that I get. But how could it be Tzadik or Rasha? What happened to Bechira Chavshi? So the Gemara says, okay, take out Tzadik or Rasha, right? So, so again, like everything is faded except what are your actions going to be, right? That the Gemara is very clear. That's totally Bechira Chavshis. So here, how could we speak about the match being faded if it's Lefi Masav? Those two don't work together.
Well, I thought the question was that it's hard, because meaning like it was so hard, then how's God already knowing? Right?
No, that's not the way. You'll see, that does not seem to be the question. Rashi says, especially if you know that another Gemara sort of explicitly eliminates from this list Tzaddik and Rasha. Like really is the point, like that's not determined. So if it's Lefi Masav, how could that be faded? So on the one hand, this is the idea of Bashert, but it's interesting that the Gemara doesn't think that Bashert is equal to, your worthiness and your deeds and your character. Well, maybe character, but not deeds. Okay, so let's take a look.
No, I thought didn't we just say a second before that Kashin Kriyat Yam Suf, and then it said Aini, so the Aini's not going Kriyat Yam Suf, is going on the thing before it?
Yeah, that's the way Rashi understands. Okay, so the Gemara says, Lo Kasha, Habizug Rishon, Habizug Sheni. First marriage or second marriage? The first marriage is Bashert, is the Bas Kol is Yotzes. The second marriage is Lefi Masav, which is like, what? So like you only get the spouse you deserve if you have a second marriage. The first spouse is based on some type of a fate, and are you telling me that the whole idea of Bashert is that it's not a good match necessarily? It's just what's like somehow destined because of life circumstances? I mean, it's very hard to come up with a satisfying sort of like theological, religious resolution to, no, it can't be because the Lefi Masav is the whole point that it hasn't happened yet. So that's number one. Actually, I saw some of the Mefarshim actually ask, actually the Tosfos Shantz, I think he says, I don't know, it's one of the Balei Tosfos, okay, probably from the student of the Rashmi Shantz, okay, which anyway, so Sens, right, which is towns in Germany. So anyway, the point is, he says it's only Lefi Masav if it's a second marriage for both of them. Because presumably, if it's not a second marriage for both of them, for one of them, it's still who they were fated for. Of course, that's interesting because this whole thing is being said from the man's perspective. So you might have said, the woman doesn't get anything fated. It's just like the man, right? It's Lefi his masav, Lefi his fate. So once he's on to his second marriage, it could be her first, but but it's interesting that he sort of balances it along that lines of whose perspective is it? Look at Tosfos, Kodem Yitir Savlad. Tosfos says, Nira l'Rebbe, Kodem Yitzir HaZachar, Beinim lo noda nekeva adayin beinim noda, right? Because it says, so it's all basically the man is the one being matched up. And, maybe he also was dealing with the reality we're dealing with, which is that if they married younger women, which he was dealing with that reality. So how could you have matched him up if the woman hadn't been created yet? So Marsha wants to say, that's why it says bas ploni leploni, because you don't even know yet. She's not, you just know it'll be that man's daughter, but she hasn't yet even come into existence yet. I don't know. Anyway, so again, it is interesting, obviously, the whole male perspective and how this then doesn't help the Reish Lakish's, the whole nice drasha about Sotah. Because then if, certainly in those times, most people were only on a first marriage. I mean, I guess after later in life, it could be because there was a lot of death and childbirth. But anyway, there certainly was a lot less divorce, right? So to say, oh, well, the first marriage is not Lefi Masav, then it doesn't help for Pashat Sotah, for everybody who's on a first marriage, right? It doesn't say anything about that. So it's clearly that was not Reish Lakish's intention. The Gemara is trying to reconcile two different midrashim, but clearly Reish Lakish's intention was to say that it's always Lefi Masav. And again, when we sort of imagine the idea of Bashert, we imagine Bashert because it's the right person, right? It's not just somehow fated, but it's fated because somehow it's the right match. It's the Kashim Zivugim, right? This is putting all of that onto the second marriage and making the first one somewhat arbitrary, or seems to be, right? So it's hard to sort of deal with this Gemara that tries to bring these two together. All right, let's continue. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Mekana la pishnayim. Ad kan lo pligi, says the Gemara, ela bekino v'stira. So they're only arguing whether the warning and the going into hiding, actually not even, we're arguing about the warning. The warning they agree is 2, and then they're debating about whether the going into private needs 2 or 1. Aval betuma, if there was somebody to testify directly that he had committed adultery, not just she went into a private place, but that he said, I saw them commit adultery. So then, Eid Echad Mehemen, presumably one witness would be believed. Now, how do you know that? Right? Tosfos says, what do you mean? Maybe, think about it. If one witness says she committed adultery, we're going to find out you don't make her drink the water. You only make her drink the water if you have a doubt. If a witness says she committed adultery, we're going to say, it's not 2 witnesses, so we're not going to kill her, right? We don't have that type of a witness. What we're going to say, we assume that then we're going to say, then we'll treat it as if she definitely did it. Again, not enough to prosecute her, but enough to say that she gets divorced without a ksuva, she can't drink the water and all those things. So Tosfos says, how do you know that everybody would agree to a lower standard? Maybe because if the consequence is so final, everybody would demand a higher standard of 2 witnesses. So there's really nothing in the Mishnah that makes it clear that if it's about direct testimony, whether 1 would suffice. So Tosfos basically says, yeah, because we're going to have a breita that says that, so we're really just doing a lead into that breita. But there, you could just have easily have said that you needed actually 2 because of the more severe consequences of that testimony. All right. So anyway, but that's what the Gemara is saying. But when it comes to testifying, one is believed. And again, by the way, I should also mention this one who is believed is with a backdrop of kinoi and stira. If one guy just shows up and says, I saw this woman commit adultery, it's like, there's Gemaras where basically they lashed a guy because of that, because of Motzi Shemra. So it's actually, he's only believed when it builds on the foundation of kinoi and stira. If you take a look, Rashi says that explicitly. Rashi says, it's 6 lines from the bottom. Rashi says, "Betuma shel stira achar kinoi." Only if there was a kinoi, there was a stira, and then he comes and he says, "I saw her commit adultery." And
with this person, right?
Presumably, right, with this person. Okay, so that's really not hinted to in the Mishnah, but we're coming with an assumption that that's the halacha. We're using this as an opportunity to put that on the table. That for the adultery that follow to the act following the warning, that we believe the Eid Echad enough that she's divorced and loses her ksufa. So betuma Eid Echad meheman, but it's not nami. So here's really why we say it, not really how we know this. One witness says that I saw her become tamei. Lo haisa shosa. She wouldn't drink, and we would just assume, take him at his word, and she'd get divorced without a ksuva. He would be believed. So, how do you know one witness is believed in this type of a case? So, the Tana Rabbanan, because we taught. The aid ain ba. Okay, vihi lo nitpasa. So it says he suspects his wife, but there's no witness to the fact, and she was not raped. Okay, and then it goes on. That's the parsha of Sotah. So it says b'shnayim akasim medaber. It means that there are not 2 witnesses. Oh, eina ela filu be'echad. Maybe it means there's not even 1 witness. It says aid in the singular. Tamad lomar lo yakum eid echad be'each. one man cannot rise up against, one witness cannot rise up against a person. You could have just said an aide should not rise up against a person. So of course I'd be talking about even one man. Once, it would say it in the singular, one witness. Why does it have to say one witness? This becomes a paradigm. Aid. From this we can infer, because we how to say echad, that the word aid by itself, harekan shnayim, means a group of eidim, two eidim that would have the full weight of witnesses. Okay, so therefore, because it said echad, I learned that aid by itself means two witnesses. Very universal principle reads the psukim, that aid by itself means two witnesses.
That's amazing. Okay. That's like an amazing question.
Yeah. so until the Torah tells you one, but aid by itself means two. Amar Chmana, trei leisba el echad. So it says the aid ain't ba. Now we're going to say two witnesses against her. There's one witness against her. Okay, the hilo nitpas, and she hasn't been raped. So if it's saying there's only one witness against her, and she hasn't been raped, presumably, therefore, what's the consequence of that? There's testimony that she committed adultery. There's not two witnesses, there's one, and it wasn't case of rape. So therefore, presumably, the consequence is asura. The aid is believed and she's forbidden. Now again, that is a strange read of the psukim, because the psukim say aidin ba v'hilo nitpasa ve'via ite shito. Right? Because there aren't witnesses, he has to go through the ritual of Sotah. Yes, that's what the psukim say. Yes, everybody with me, right? That's what the psukim say. Whereas the Gemara is saying, oh, there aren't two witnesses, there's one witness. Oh, in that case, don't go through the ritual of Sotah. We'll assume she did it. Right? So besides, reading in the pasuk that there's one witness, it reads a new law about that. And if there's one witness, then it's going to be even more severe. We're going to assume she did it, and you don't go through the ritual of Sotah. Okay, so that's how we're reading it. Ella, time, now the Gemara is just going to figure out the, let's just get to the two dots. It'll figure out what it could have said. Ella, time of the cost of lo yakum eid echad be'ish. It's because it says lo yakum eid echad. Halav hachiyav amina eid desot echad. So now it's going back to say, you only knew the word aid meant one witness because of this other pasuk that taught you that aid means, that you only knew that aid meant two witnesses because of this other pasuk that tells you the word aid always means two witnesses. Okay? If it weren't for that other pasuk, I would have said there isn't even one witness against her, right? That's how I most likely would have read the pasuk. So the Gemara says, how could I have read it that way? If there isn't even one witness, how does she become forbidden? Now again, it's a strange question, because the simple sense of the pasuk is, because there's no witnesses, he has to bring her to the Beis HaMikdash. But we're reading the pasuk, there's not two witnesses, and she wasn't raped, and therefore she's forbidden. Somehow we're reading in this other thing in the pasuk, that in this case, don't bring her to the Beis HaMikdash, she's forbidden. So it says, so of course it means that there was not two but one, because if there were no witnesses, why would she be forbidden? Okay, so it's true. No, I needed from this other pasuk to tell me that aid meant two. Why? Here's how I could have read the pasuk thinking aid means one. Aid ain't ba. It means one. There's not one witness against her. Means ein neman ba. Okay, it would have just got me to the same place. Actually, no, it would have told me one witness is not believed to testify against her. I would have said you would have needed two witnesses if you want to conclude definitely that she committed adultery. That's how I would have read it had the word aid meant one. It says 1 minute. Ein neman ba. So if it's telling me one witness is not believed, so what would it have told me I would have needed if I would have read the pasuk that way? Adika trey would have said, oh, you can't believe one witness. You need two witnesses. That's how I would have read the pasuk if aid would have meant one rather than two. So if that's true, lishta kramine. So why would I need a pasuk to tell me I need two witnesses? I always know you need two witnesses. The asya davar mi mamon. It says by mamon. It says by like committing adultery. Umatzaba ervat davar. It has the word davar. It says by a pasuk by money. It says api shnayim edim. So shnayim edim yakum davar. So I know that all two. What it's saying is, you told me aid and ba means there's not two witnesses, there's one. I had to read it that way because I couldn't have read it meant one witness is not against her, because then she wouldn't have been presumed guilty. And I couldn't have read it, don't believe one witness against her, because I wouldn't have needed a pasuk. I would have known that you always need two witnesses. So the Gemara says, I would have known that two witnesses aren't believed, that you need two witnesses, even if you have not said anything. You always need two witnesses. Here becomes the point about this whole little hypothetical. Okay, so pay attention now. It's true. No, here's why I would have needed the pasuk to explicitly say that you needed two, which is not the halacha, but here's why I would have needed it. I would have thought to say, if the pasuk had said nothing, I would have thought maybe here we should believe one. Why here should we believe one? Because Sotah Shani, here it's different than normal cases. Diraglayim l'davar, that you should remember that from just a few days ago in Nazir. Because there's circumstantial evidence. There's a good basis to presume it. So had the Torah said, so I would have said, naturally I would have said one would have been believed. And maybe that's why the Torah would have to tell me, don't believe one, you need two. Now, what's the Raglaim L'davar? He warned her, and she disregarded his warning. The warning isn't enough. The warning might just be his own jealousy, but it's the combination of the disregarding and going into private fire and was suspicious. Means we got to look into this. Okay. So it could have been the Torah was telling me, don't believe one, you need two, because I would have had a reason to believe one. The funny thing is that actually is the halacha, right? Remember, the halacha winds up being, we do believe one witness here. Normally, we need two witnesses. And at the end of the day, we're saying here, we believe one witness, again, not to prosecute her, but to say she's divorced without a ksuva. Why do we believe one witness? By that she committed adultery. So the Gemara is telling you, so right here, the Gemara has introduced two major points about Masechet Sotah. Number one, Asur Lekanos, and raising that question, right, about like, sort of like you shouldn't be doing it, not raising the question, raising the issue that it's a bad thing. And number two, explaining why it actually, all of this makes sense. Because of Raglayim L'davar. That's why we go through with the ritual. That's why an Eid Echad would be believed, because of Raglayim L'davar. Yeah.
The one witness is. The circumstantial evidence is based on the one witness.
No. The circumstantial evidence is based on the two witnesses that he warned her, and then she went into private. And well, that depends, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua. Okay, so some of that might also be one witness, but based on Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua. But then, in addition to all of that, a witness then says she committed adultery. Right. Well, let me just. Okay, well, you know what? It's already 8:30, so I'm just going to read the last sentence. Okay, so the Gemara says, so the Ein Neman Bavasharya. How could I have thought to read the pasuk to mean don't believe one, she'll be, and therefore she'll be permitted. That would have been the hypothetical read of the pasuk. It says she wasn't raped. The point of the pasuk is to tell you that she's forbidden because she's not raped. Is that there's not a mitigating factor? I mean, we assume she did it. No, it's true. I would have thought to read the pasuk the following way: Ein neman ba, one witness is not believed. Adika trey, you need two, and if you have two, then she'll be guilty. Ubetray nami, he deloni pasa. She'll be guilty if she hasn't been raped. Kamash malan. Don't read the pasuk that way. So all this was a hypothetical. Don't read the pasuk that way. We read the pasuk that there are not two witnesses. There's one witness, and she hasn't been raped. That's enough to assume that she did it and she would not drink the waters. So one witness of having committed adultery already determines that she's guilty to the point not that she gets prosecuted, but she gets divorced without a ksufa. Okay. So sorry for going over.
So we're saying circumstantial evidence is that he warned her.